step back in time and witness the extraordinary journey of Prince Albert, a thoughtful German prince who rose above court intrigue and public skepticism to redefine the very essence of the British monarchy. Through intellectual rigor, unwavering moral conviction, and an unshakable partnership with Queen Victoria, Albert championed innovation, cultural enrichment, and global collaboration. From orchestrating the landmark Great Exhibition of 1851 to transforming royal finances and daily life in Buckingham Palace, his influence shaped an era and continues to resonate far beyond the Victorian age. Born on August 26, 1819, into the ducal family of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, Prince Albert's early upbringing was marked by both opulence and emotional turbulence. His father, Duke Ernest I, and his mother, Duchess Louise, held prominent positions in German nobility, yet their union was plagued by discord and suspicion. The eventual divorce of his parents, finalized when Albert was just 5 years old, left him and his elder brother, Ernest, in an environment where marital strife overshadowed parental warmth. Tutors and governesses took the place of affectionate nurturing, instilling in him a disciplined, introspective character from a very young age. Yet, even in this charged atmosphere, he developed a deep fondness for learning that would define much of his later life. Under the guidance of private teachers, he studied history, music, art, languages, and the emerging sciences, diligently memorizing facts by day and mulling them over by candlelight at night. A sense of earnestness and moral gravity emerged as a coping mechanism against familial tension, and he grew into a serious-minded adolescent with a penchant for order, responsibility, and intellectual pursuits. As he matured, Albert enrolled at the University of Bonn, immersing himself in law, political economy, philosophy, and art history. These fields, while diverse, all contributed to a worldview that emphasized enlightenment, education, and the greater social good. Professors were struck by his capacity not merely to absorb information, but to connect it in meaningful ways. Legal statutes spoke to him about justice. Political economy raised questions of fairness and the distribution of wealth. And art history, particularly classical art, allowed him to appreciate the power of cultural heritage in shaping national identity. His inclination toward thoroughness and moral reasoning distinguished him from many of his royal peers, who often saw education as a formality rather than a true passion. He began to harbor ideas that royalty should not merely reign, but guide, support, and elevate the society over which it presided. Back in England, events were unfolding that would change Albert's life forever. His uncle, King Leopold I of Belgium, maintained close ties with his niece, Princess Victoria, heir to the British throne. Even before Victoria officially became queen, it was in Leopold's mind, and in the minds of other European monarchs, that a marital alliance between his Coburg nephew and the young British heir could serve as a unifying thread between two powerful royal houses. In 1836, Albert traveled with his brother Ernest to meet Victoria for the first time. He made a polite but strong impression on her, aided by his refined manners, gentle seriousness, and musical skill. He was quite an adept pianist, and music would remain a shared interest throughout their relationship. Although both Albert and Victoria were still teenagers and uncertain about their future roles, there was a mutual spark that neither could ignore. By 1837, Victoria ascended the throne. An 18-year-old queen suddenly thrust into the complexities of court politics, prime ministerial guidance, and the demands of her own household. Her early reign was navigated with the help of Lord Melbourne, who served as her first prime minister, and an influential mentor figure. Still, the question of marriage loomed large, for in the public eye and according to tradition, a monarch needed a consort to provide both personal support and dynastic continuity. In 1839, Albert returned for a second visit. this time to a royal court that no longer belonged to a sheltered princess, but to the Queen of the United Kingdom. The dynamic had shifted. Victoria now held sovereign powers, and her impressions of Albert deepened considerably. Duty and affection converged. In a turn of events that both followed protocol and subtly defied some conventions, she proposed to him. Being queen meant she was expected to take the lead in such matters. Albert accepted, and the two were wed on February 10, 1840, in a ceremony that captured public imagination for its elegant blend of tradition and genuine emotion. In the early days of his marriage, Albert encountered several immediate challenges. Despite his new status, Parliament was reluctant to grant him a lofty title or extensive income. Some members and segments of the British public saw him as a foreign interloper at best, and a potential German spy at worst. Parliament grudgingly provided a smaller annual allowance than was typically awarded to a consort, reflecting widespread suspicion of Albert's motives and influence. This sense of being an outsider could easily have embittered him, but he responded with composure and stoic resilience. Gradually, his sincerity, intelligence, and devotion to Victoria began to change perceptions. He was determined to prove his loyalty not just to his wife, but to her kingdom and its people. From the outset, Albert's role at court was ambiguous. Constitutionally, the sovereign held power, but Victoria's youth and inexperience meant that she often looked to Albert for advice on policy matters and state documents. Albert, in turn, immersed himself in British political life. He studied the intricacies of government, read daily dispatches, and offered suggestions that balanced moral considerations with pragmatic governance. In a period when Parliament and the monarchy were renegotiating their balance of power, gradually shifting toward the more ceremonial role that the crown would assume in later generations, Albert's presence as a learned, judicious voice had a stabilizing effect. Although he had no formal constitutional power, his influence became palpable in the Queen's decisions, whether concerning appointments, policy stances, or the overall tone of royal engagement with the public. Yet he faced court intrigue. The palace was filled with attendants and courtiers loyal to different political factions. Victoria's relationships with prime ministers, including the likes of Sir Robert Peel and Lord Palmerston, could be complicated, and Albert inevitably found himself navigating these tensions behind the scenes. One of his most pressing tasks was to redefine the structure of the royal household, rooting out extravagances and reorganizing finances to reflect a more modern sense of responsibility. He insisted on careful accounting and a stringent approach to household management, a move that won him praise among reform-minded politicians, but also stirred resentment among those who preferred traditional regal excess. Some saw his effort as meddlesome or stingy, but Albert's guiding principle was that the monarchy should not be perceived as squandering resources at a time when industrialization was remaking the social order, often with harsh consequences for the working classes. As Albert settled into his role, his personal passions began to shape his contributions to the kingdom. Having long admired scientific and technological progress, he directed royal patronage toward societies and institutions that championed discovery. He joined the Royal Society, engaged with the British Association for the Advancement of Science, and consulted with leading scientific minds of the day. Eager to demonstrate that monarchy could serve as a beacon for intellectual development, he promoted the collection and organization of scientific instruments, botanical specimens, and engineering models at royal residences. His interest in photography, still an emerging art and technology, was particularly forward-thinking. He financed and encouraged photographic documentation of art, architecture, and even the royal family, understanding that this new medium could democratize cultural access and preserve historical moments for posterity. While his support of the sciences underscored his progressive mindset, Albert also revered the cultural sphere. He took a keen interest in the royal collection, curating paintings, sculptures, and decorative arts, with a systematic approach that had never been applied before. Art, to Albert, was not merely decorative. It was a vital expression of human creativity, linked to moral and intellectual improvement. He believed that by exposing the public to great works, the monarchy could help cultivate a more enlightened and harmonious society. Through exhibitions in various royal palaces and support for public galleries, Albert encouraged a dialogue between the crown and the burgeoning middle class, whose tastes and aspirations were rapidly shaping the cultural landscape of Victorian Britain. Nowhere did these combined passions for art, science, and global exchange come together more vividly than in the Great Exhibition of 1851. Though many figures contributed ideas, Albert served as the driving force behind this colossal undertaking. The concept was revolutionary: to invite nations from around the world to showcase their industrial, artistic, and scientific achievements in a single, magnificent venue. Hosted in Hyde Park, the exhibit took place in a massive structure of iron and glass dubbed the Crystal Palace, an architectural marvel designed by Joseph Paxton. This shimmering edifice became a symbol of modernity and optimism. Over 6 million people attended, an extraordinary feat in an era long before air travel or advanced public transport. Exhibitors displayed inventions ranging from precision machinery to elaborate textiles. The event offered a kaleidoscopic glimpse into humanity's creative and technological potential, with Britain at center stage. Albert's vision was broader than merely asserting Britain's industrial primacy. He believed that by bringing different countries together, the seeds of mutual respect, understanding, and peaceful competition would be sown. He saw the Great Exhibition as an emblem of progress that transcended national borders. Despite some political resistance, critics feared an influx of foreigners might destabilize the social order or even lead to security threats. The exhibition was an undisputed triumph, both financially and culturally. The profits went toward purchasing land in South Kensington and establishing educational and cultural institutions, including what would later become the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Natural History Museum, and the Science Museum, collectively transforming that district into a hub of knowledge and artistic heritage. This bold move underscored Albert's belief that wealth generated by innovation should be reinvested for the public good. Amid these grand achievements, Albert also confronted the complexities of fatherhood and domestic life within the palace walls. He and Victoria had 9 children, each one representing another link in the extensive chain of European royal families. Albert took an unusually active role in their upbringing, insisting on a robust education that merged academic rigor with moral development. He supervised lessons, oversaw the appointment of tutors, and made sure the children were exposed to music, literature, and the sciences. His approach defied the custom of delegating child-rearing entirely to nannies and governesses. Many in the court found it peculiar for a prince to involve himself so deeply in the mundane details of his children's daily routines, but Albert felt that guiding and shaping future monarchs was among his highest duties. That sense of duty led to inevitable strains, particularly with his eldest son, the Prince of Wales. Later, Edward VII. Nicknamed Bertie within the family, the young heir chafed under the strict discipline his father imposed. Whereas Albert prized diligence, academic seriousness, and moral rectitude, Bertie had a more extroverted and carefree temperament. Their clashes became well known within the palace. Albert criticized Bertie's frivolities, while the prince sought an escape from what he saw as relentless, stifling expectations. Yet Albert's rigor was never motivated by malice. Rather, he feared that any lapse in conduct by the future king could undermine the stability of the crown at a critical juncture in modern history. Though father and son would never fully reconcile their differences, Albert's devotion to principle over indulgence set a precedent that would linger in the British royal family for generations. He also found himself maneuvering through the labyrinthine sphere of European diplomacy. drawing on his connections to numerous German principalities and other royal houses. Despite not holding a formal ministerial post, Albert often acted as an informal advisor and mediator. His German heritage initially raised alarms among those who believed he might prioritize foreign interests, but, over time, the clarity of his motives, seeking peace and mutual advancement, became evident. During the revolutions of 1848, which saw upheaval sweep across Europe, he paid close attention to developments in Germany. He worried about the spread of radical ideas that might destabilize monarchies. Yet he also recognized that calls for constitutional reform were partly justified. His correspondence from that period reveals a thoughtful balance between a respect for tradition and a recognition that certain forms of progress were inevitable. He endeavored to guide Victoria's stances on how Britain should respond or react diplomatically, consistently advocating caution and moderation. Throughout the 1850s, Albert's role in foreign and domestic policy continued to expand. He formed working relationships with statesmen of different party affiliations, including Sir Robert Peel and later Lord Palmerston, even though he often found Palmerston's forthright and impulsive style to be at odds with his own measured approach. Albert's influence did not always guarantee harmonious outcomes. He could be direct and unyielding in discussions, occasionally ruffling feathers among high-ranking politicians. But what set him apart was a consistent moral framework. He believed that the monarchy should act as a force for moral good, transcending political partisanship when possible. This stance is evident in his engagement with issues like slavery. He quietly supported abolitionist sentiments in the United States, though he was careful not to overstep official diplomatic channels. Within Britain, Albert's concern for social reform grew, shaped by his understanding that industrialization, for all its technological marvels, had spawned immense social challenges. Overcrowded cities, squalid housing, and exploitative labor conditions threatened to ignite unrest. Albert saw it as essential for the royal family to publicly endorse and patronize charitable initiatives aimed at the urban poor. He maintained close ties with societies that sought to improve housing standards, sponsoring model dwellings that showcased hygienic, well-ventilated designs. The idea was to inspire builders, philanthropists, and even the government to prioritize workers' well-being. Likewise, he took an interest in public health reforms, supporting better sanitation systems in rapidly expanding cities like London. While he stopped short of radical political engagement, his advocacy lent critical visibility to causes that might otherwise have been dismissed by the conservative establishment. Life in the royal palaces, Buckingham Palace in London, Windsor Castle in Berkshire, Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, and eventually Balmoral Castle in Scotland, reflected Albert's evolving values. He and Victoria yearned for retreats from the ceremonial heaviness of court life. Osborne House, for instance, was rebuilt under Albert's guidance into an Italianate palazzo that served as a family haven. There, away from the formality of Buckingham Palace, the couple could spend time with their children in a comparatively relaxed environment. Albert oversaw the landscaping of the gardens, introducing terraces, walkways, and vantage points that highlighted the island's natural beauty. Over at Balmoral, in the Scottish Highlands, he took a similar interest in architecture and design, working with local craftsmen and reveling in the rugged landscape. These projects were not simply indulgences. For Albert, building comfortable yet tasteful homes was an extension of his desire to forge a royal image that embraced domestic harmony, cultural refinement, and closeness to nature, a pointed contrast to older conceptions of royal life as purely ceremonious and aloof. When it came to daily interactions at court, Albert applied the same meticulous rigor he devoted to organizing finances or curating art. He expected punctuality, neatness, and discipline from palace staff, believing that a well-ordered household mirrored a well-ordered society. Some staff members found this shift jarring compared to the more relaxed protocols of prior reigns, yet over time, many came to respect his consistency and fairness. Albert introduced schedules and procedures to streamline official functions, reduce wastage, and ensure that visitors, whether aristocrats, diplomats, or notable citizens, were received with efficient courtesy. The result was a court culture more in line with Victorian notions of respectability, which won admiration from the middle classes, who were increasingly setting the tone of national morality. Meanwhile, Albert's diplomatic endeavors extended across the Atlantic. One of the most tense episodes occurred in 1861 with the Trent Affair, when a U.S. Navy captain intercepted a British mail packet and forcibly removed 2 Confederate diplomats. Britain and the United States hovered on the brink of war. Although severely ill at the time, Albert reviewed the British government's draft communication to Washington. He softened its language, urging a more conciliatory tone that might preserve peace. His intervention was significant in preventing an escalation that could have drawn Britain into the American Civil War. That moment encapsulated how Albert's behind-the-scenes influence reached far beyond the confines of Buckingham Palace. Even if he had no official mandate to negotiate, his thoughtful counsel proved instrumental at a critical juncture. Tragically, Albert's unrelenting workload and the perpetual stress of his position soon began to take a toll on his health. He was known to work late into the night, reading government dispatches, drafting memoranda, and penning letters to foreign relatives and dignitaries. His sense of duty, coupled with the emotional strain of navigating court politics and family issues, wore him down. By late 1861, he had grown visibly weak. Some accounts suggest he was suffering from chronic gastrointestinal ailments. Others mention fevers and a compromised immune system. Medical science at the time was limited, and while typhoid fever was eventually cited as the cause of his death, subsequent speculation proposes that his underlying health problems may have been more complex. On December 14, 1861, at Windsor Castle, the flame of Albert's life flickered out at the age of 42. Victoria was shattered. She withdrew from public life and wore mourning attire for the rest of her reign, nearly 4 decades, a gesture that both symbolized her personal grief and reshaped the public's perception of monarchy. The Queen's prolonged seclusion drew criticism from politicians and the press, who felt the monarch owed a more active presence to her people. Yet this reclusive period only elevated Albert's posthumous status in her mind and, gradually, in the nation's collective memory. In the years following his death, numerous tributes arose, statues, plaques, and monumental projects such as the Albert Memorial in Kensington Gardens and the Royal Albert Hall. These stood, and still stand, not merely as grandiose gestures, but as representations of a life lived in service to cultural expansion, scientific growth, and the moral progress of the nation. Bereft of her most trusted confidant, Victoria clung to Albert's memory as a guiding principle in her decisions. She meticulously ensured that his papers, letters, and personal effects were preserved. In many ways, her monarchical approach after his death was shaped by the lessons she had absorbed from him about responsibility, moral authority, and public engagement. Although her intense mourning cast a somber tone over the court, it also kept Albert's priorities at the forefront. Under her subsequent prime ministers, the monarchy continued to evolve along a trajectory of increasing constitutional balance, philanthropic involvement, and ceremonial significance. Much of that transformation traced back directly to Albert's influence. In the decades that followed, their children extended the Coburg lineage into multiple European royal families, an intermarriage network so extensive that Victoria became known as the grandmother of Europe. Albert's guiding philosophies on education, moral righteousness, and intellectual curiosity took root in various courts across the continent, albeit to differing degrees. Some historians argue that these family ties may have helped maintain a semblance of peace in Europe at certain intervals, though it was not enough to prevent the major conflicts of the early 20th century. Nonetheless, Albert's legacy permeated discussions about how a constitutional monarchy should operate in the modern world, serving less as an absolute authority and more as a unifying symbol that could encourage cultural and scientific endeavors. In Britain, his imprint remained vivid. The museums in South Kensington, particularly the Victoria and Albert Museum, continued to expand their collections, democratizing access to knowledge in art, design, and industry for countless visitors. The ideals that propelled the Great Exhibition never fully faded, resonating in subsequent World's Fairs and international expositions that celebrated creativity and technological progress. British monarchs in later eras, including Edward VII, George V, George VI, and Elizabeth II, inherited a throne already shaped by Albert's convictions that the crown's survival rested on moral leadership, public engagement, and support for philanthropic and cultural institutions.